Good afternoon on this Saturday, August 25th. Tropical Storm Isaac is now situated just north of the eastern tip of Cuba. If it starts to drift a little bit more toward the north, that would give it a greater chance of becoming a Category 1 before impacting the Florida Keys Sunday afternoon. Thereafter, the Hurricane Center is forecasting Isaac to strengthen into a 100-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane before making landfall somewhere along the central Gulf Coast. If there is going to need to be any changes to the intensity forecast, it may have to be with a slightly higher intensity, as the models are showing a very favorable environment out across the central and eastern Gulf. The western Florida Panhandle continues to be the area that has the highest probability of a direct landfall, but interest out across the central Gulf should not be paying attention to just the black line. That cone of error is very important, not only because there can still be deviations in the forecast track, but also because Isaac is a fairly large storm with a large wind field, so many areas outside of just the initial black line will be impacted by tropical storm and potentially even hurricane force winds. That is the reason why everyone from southeast Louisiana all the way through the Big Bend needs to continue to watch Isaac, not to mention we still have fairly good model disagreement with tracks ranging that far west and east. This graphic displays the potential for tropical storm force winds over the next 5 days, and the probabilities will steadily increase along the central Gulf Coast as the landfall time approaches. This graphic shows the 50 knot or greater wind probabilities, and finally the final graphic shows the hurricane force wind speed probabilities once again for the next 120 hours. Storm surge will become a greater impact once the center of Isaac starts to move from the Florida Keys and especially into the southeast Gulf of Mexico, as much of the Gulf Coast is more shallow than the east coast of Florida, which makes it more vulnerable to the surge, and what you are currently viewing are the probabilities of the storm surge exceeding 2 to 3 feet, and of course the surge probabilities will drastically increase wherever the center of Isaac is likely to wind up near the central Gulf Coast. Also, significant wave heights on top of the storm surge is likely to increase over the next 72 hours as shown by the latest COAMS forecast, and some of these values are likely underdone out across the central and eastern Gulf. The latest visible satellite animation confirms that Tropical Storm Isaac has held up fairly well despite moving across western Haiti over the past 18 hours, and the center of circulation is now across the northern coast of Cuba. As mentioned in the Hurricane Center discussion, Isaac does have some interaction with a much weaker low between Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, and this weak surface low feature could induce more of a westerly track within the next 24 to 36 hours. So we are fairly confident that the center of circulation is either going to pass over or just to the south of the Florida Keys, but nonetheless, all interests across southern Florida should be watching Isaac very closely, as the storm does have a fairly large wind field, and tropical storm force winds well to the north of the center are likely. You can see on the latest enhanced infrared that much of the convection is displaced away from the center now that the storm has moved away from the mountains. So over time, the convection is going to steadily move back toward the center, and that is when re-intensification will start to be underway. Also, this is just another quick look at the zoomed-in spaghetti model plots as of 18Z this afternoon, and as you can see, there is a very good consensus situated directly over the Florida Keys. The wind threat will of course continue for the next 24 to 48 hours, and all interests located in mobile homes are advised to evacuate, as it doesn't take much more than moderate tropical storm force winds to cause issues for those locations, and also the threat of significant rainfall and isolated flooding will be likely, as we do have 8 to 10 inches being progged by the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center. There's also the risk of isolated weak and brief tornadoes, especially to the north of the center in those outer bands as they spread more so toward the inland regions, even up toward the north near Orlando as we go on into the day Monday. It also goes without saying that storm surge will be an issue for interest, especially down near the Florida Keys in those low-lying areas. Isaac is likely going to be an even far greater problem as it starts to move toward the north-central Gulf Tuesday and early Wednesday, as upper-level ridging is likely to move into the southeast Gulf, so vertical wind shear values should be less than 5 to 10 knots, and sea surface temperatures to the south of Alabama and Florida are more than adequate for rapid intensification into a major hurricane. As a result, the models are starting to become a little more aggressive with the intensity within 60 to 72 hours, and we have many more model members supporting near Category 2 hurricane intensity by this time, and the models are likely to trend even higher over the next 24 to 48 hours. The newest 18Z run of the GFS model is also steadily becoming more bullish with the idea of rapid intensification once the storm begins to clear southern Florida Sunday night and Monday morning. As you can see, the GFS is still showing a more westerly movement within the past 2 or 3 runs, and as we go into late afternoon on the day Tuesday, we see that the forward motion is expected to slow down drastically just to the south of Dauphin Island, Alabama, while the GFS is also implying that rapid intensification could be underway, and the storm is now forecast to make landfall sometime early Wednesday or even Wednesday afternoon as a result of this slower rate of speed. However, there are still major timing and track differences between several of the major models. In terms of the vertical wind shear forecast being progged by the GFS model, it now has the upper level ridge centered directly over the central and eastern Gulf of Mexico. And if we turn to the latest 500 millibar steering layer analysis from the GFS, we can see why the GFS is showing a slower rate of speed in the latest run. You see that over the next 48 to 72 hours, the trough is expected to dip more toward the south, near the Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic states. However, this trough is not fully strong enough to pick up Isaac in this run, and we do have building ridging out across the central U.S. as we go on into the day Tuesday afternoon. Therefore, the GFS is now implying more of a westerly track and a slower rate of motion as the battle between the trough and the ridge continues. However, the Hurricane Center track is still in fairly close agreement with the latest European run now that the European has become the more easterly solution. But as we go into 48 and 72 hours, the overall synoptic steering is very similar between the GFS and the European, with the trough diving into the U.S. eastern seaboard, but with building ridging quickly toward the west over the central United States and central plains. But the trough in this particular run is still strong enough to bring Isaac toward the north near Panama City. However, with the forecasted patterns being so similar between the models, we understand that there is the potential for a slower rate of motion and possibly a more westerly track. What you are now viewing is the 96-hour Day 4 ECMWF Ensemble mean forecast, and based on this graphic you can get the overall picture that there is still some model spread from as far west as southeast Louisiana to as far east as the Big Bend region of Florida. And although the signature is drastically weaker after landfall Thursday and Friday, you still get the picture that some of the remnants would get trapped underneath this ridge and push more toward the west, at least based on a couple of the ECMWF Ensemble members. So the afternoon Hurricane Center track and intensity forecast appears to be in relatively good shape this afternoon with a consensus between the two scenarios. However, if there are going to be any trends over the next day or so with any adjustments that need to be made, they may be for a track slightly more to the west of this solution, and the intensity forecast may be nudged upward closer toward Category 3 hurricane intensity before all is said and done. We will have frequent updates on Tropical Storm Isaac as it continues to push through southern Florida over the next day or so, and we will continue the discussions as Isaac begins to roll into the central and northern Gulf of Mexico.